The future arsenal of Ukraine's war effort is being forged, one scorching artillery shell at a time, inside a vast factory off the President Biden Expressway in the heart of Scranton, Pennsylvania. The Scranton Army Ammunition Plant produces approximately 11,000 artillery shells per month when it is operating at full capacity, as it was on a recent January morning. Although that may seem excessive, the Ukrainian military frequently fires that many shells in the span of a few days. The Scranton plant is undergoing a significant expansion as a result of the Pentagon's increased defense spending, in order to meet that demand. It is making investments in new high-tech equipment, hiring a few dozen more people, and eventually switching to a 24/7 schedule of continuous production. Over the past year, it's undoubtedly gotten worse. It will be able to ramp up even more as we bring in more advanced machinery, according to Todd Smith, Senior Director of General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems, which runs the plant for the Army. Over the past year, the military of Ukraine has already received close to $50 billion in supplies and equipment from the US and its allies. The Pentagon is rushing to rearm, starting the biggest increase in ammunition production in decades, and putting some parts of the US defense industry on a war footing, despite the fact that America is not technically at war. This is done to maintain the status quo and to rebuild its own stockpiles. About $3 billion has been set aside by the Pentagon to purchase weapons from allies abroad and increase domestic production. Some of that money will be used to produce 155mm artillery shells, which have evolved into a wartime necessity. According to Army Acquisition Chief Doug Bush, the Army is planning a 500% increase in artillery shell production, from 15,000 per month to 70,000. The Scranton plant, which produces a significant portion of the nation's supply of artillery shells, will meet a large portion of that increase. Ammunition factories all over the US are accelerating production. All of the rockets and missiles produced by a Lockheed Martin facility in Camden, Arkansas, including those used by the Army's Patriot missile system, are in high demand in Ukraine. In January, Bush told reporters that the Army was building a new facility in Garland, Texas to produce artillery shells, while an existing facility in Middletown, Iowa, which loads, packs, and assembles 155mm shells, was being expanded. Bush said to CNN, the Army plans to produce 60 minimum Stinger anti-aircraft missiles per month, approximately 33% more guided multiple launch rocket systems, GMLRS, surface-to-surface medium-range missiles annually, and more than twice as many Javelin anti-tank missiles. Some of the most important and relied-upon weapons used by Ukraine to thwart Russian ground advances and aerial assaults are the Stinger and Javelin missiles. Ukraine has previously informed the US that it requires 500 of each weapon daily. The US and its allies are facing a serious issue as the war in Ukraine enters its second year. Ukraine is using up ammunition faster than the US and NATO can produce it. During a crucial meeting this week in Brussels, the issue of diminishing munition supplies took center stage. The difficulties of continuing to maintain Ukraine's military's well-supplied supply were openly discussed by members of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, an alliance of 54 nations supporting the defense of Ukraine. According to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, our defense industries are under strain because Ukraine is currently spending money on ammunition at a rate that is many times higher than our current rate of production. Defense contractors in the United States are bearing a large portion of that burden. However, there are concerns about whether the US's historic rearmament effort will be sufficient. The US is still years away from achieving its anticipated level of increased weapon production, as Ukraine gets ready for an eagerly awaited spring offensive in the coming weeks. According to Michael Kaufman, director of Russia Studies at the Center for Naval Analyses, a nonprofit organization dedicated to national security research, the war depends heavily on defense industrial production. These are critical investments that the US and ultimately Ukraine will benefit from, but the question is, were they made too late to affect what could be the decisive phases of the conflict this year? When compared to the increased US production capacity, Kaufman noted that the challenges facing Ukraine were more immediate and long-term. In fact, Bush claimed that it will take the US 12 to 18 months to produce 70,000 artillery shells per month at its max rate. The US has to keep up with orders for more equipment from allies, which have been steadily rising, in addition to making sure Ukrainian troops have what they need. As a result of the war, many allies in Europe are currently increasing their orders for US military equipment, so that's adding to the demand for our production, said Bush. Compared to foreign military sales, which are typically predictable months in advance, Ukraine's need changes month to month, he added. Additionally, some experts believe that the US's own stockpiles, which have been dangerously depleted as a result of the war in Ukraine, need to be rebuilt. Seth Jones, the director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies' International Security Program, recently published a report in which he issues a dire warning. US stocks of some types of weapon systems and munitions, such as Stinger surface-to-air missiles, 155mm howitzers and ammunition, and Javelin anti-tank missile systems, have been depleted. Additionally, Jones told CNN that according to CSIS war simulations, the US runs out of key long-range munitions, like long-range anti-ship missiles, in less than a week of the war in a Pacific conflict. If our entire strategy right now, especially in the Pacific, is deterrence, we want to prevent conflict. A key part of deterrence is having the weapon systems and having enough of them pre-positioned in strategic areas, so that any actor considering the aggressive use of force knows that we mean business and have those systems in place to use, and we've got enough of them to use in a protracted conflict, Jones said. That's not where we are at the moment, though. The Pentagon is making every effort to move things along quickly. Changes to the way the nation's major defense contractors are organized as part of this effort. It is challenging for industry partners to plan ahead with production and their workforce in order to meet the needs the military lays out for them, because the military frequently works off year-to-year contracts. According to Jones of CSIS, no defense company in their right mind is going to start producing munitions if by the end of every fiscal year, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force take what it had in budget and move it to a different platform or program. Longer-term contracts are being considered by the Defense Department, according to Bush, who concurred that this would result in a more efficient supplier base. According to him, a 7-year contract, for instance, enables business to plan its workforce and production over a long period of time, rather than working from year to year. Additionally, expanding that workforce will be essential because more plants and shifts may ultimately result in more jobs. Top US defense officials expressed optimism about being able to provide Ukraine with what it needs this week in Brussels. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin declared, "With unity and urgency, we will once more deliver the support that we have promised to Ukraine. We will equip trained Ukrainian forces with the necessary tools so they can cooperate on the battlefield." In a press conference on Tuesday, Gen. Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, echoed a similar sentiment, saying that the international community will continue to support Ukraine until Russian President Vladimir Putin ends his war of choice. However, there are concerns about how long-lasting the US commitment to Ukraine really is at home. Republican support for US aid to Ukraine was found to be waning in a poll conducted in December, and there were worries that a Republican-led Congress might result in a decrease in that support, at a time when the speed at which weapons are produced could make all the difference on the battlefield. A few far-right lawmakers, including Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Paul Gosar, supported a bill that was introduced last week by Republican Representative Matt Gaetz to stop US support for Ukraine. CNN, however, has been informed by GOP sources that only a small proportion of Republican lawmakers are opposed to funding aid for Ukraine. And although Kevin McCarthy, who was the House Minority Leader at the time, said in October that Republicans could cut funding for Ukraine if they won control of the chamber, sources claim he has since retracted his remarks in order to appease senior defense hawks in the House. If everything goes as planned, US production rates will be significantly higher than they are right now in a year, according to Bush. Bush is confident that the US military and industrial base would be prepared for whatever comes after, despite the fact that it is hoped that the conflict in Ukraine will be resolved much sooner. Bush declared, "We are still the Democratic Army. And no one does it better than America."